Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we try to talk about the right things in the right ways and just kind of reshape the conversations that men have. I don't know if you've heard the word deconstruction. It's been used a lot lately in regard to people who are, quote-unquote, deconstructing their faith. It's a popular word, and there are lots of Christians, some of them pretty well known, who are going through this process or who have gone through this process. Sometimes at the end of that process, they end up denying their faith altogether. Usually, though, their first stop on that journey of deconstruction is into something else that you may have heard of called progressive Christianity. So let me set this up in a way that you would expect me to with a quote from C.S. Lewis. You've probably heard me share this one before from Mere Christianity. He says this: "We all want progress, but progress means getting nearer to the place you want. And if you are taking a wrong turn, then going forward does not necessarily make you any nearer to where you want to go. If you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man." We've all seen this when we do arithmetic. When I have started a sum the wrong way, the sooner I admit this and go back and start over again, the faster I shall get on. There's nothing progressive about being pig-headed and refusing to admit a mistake. And I think if you look at the present state of the world, it is pretty plain that humanity has been making some big mistakes. We're on the wrong road, and if that is so, we must go back. Going back is the quickest way on. So in some sense, you might say regression is the best way of progression if you're at least turning around and heading back in the right direction. So whether it's a popular Christian author, a pastor, your next-door neighbor, or maybe a member of your own family, you may have witnessed someone turning to what they might refer to as progressive Christianity. I had a lunch with a man yesterday who was talking about his son, who was once a pastor and a professing Christian and now is neither of those things. And there are a few things to note about this movement. Number one, it doesn't attract non-Christians at all. In fact, I know of really nobody who ever claimed to be a non-Christian who then became a progressive Christian. And the reason for that is because non-Christians aren't attracted to it because they already have all of what progressive Christianity is selling. They don't have a felt need to slap a Christian label on their non-Christian behavior. They can keep doing that without muddying the water by calling themselves a progressive Christian. Number two, it only attracts Christians. And that kind of begs the question, why? Like, what is it about progressive Christianity that doesn't attract non-Christians but does attract Christians? And I think there's several things going on. I mean, you could write books about that, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But I really just want to talk about two things that are, I think, the main drivers behind the progressive Christian movement. Number one is a desire to have a seat at the cool kid table. We all remember that kind of feeling in the lunchroom when you were perhaps in elementary school or junior high, when you are carrying that tray with, the square pizza on it, and you look to your right and you look to your left, and you see all these different tables, and there's always in every lunchroom a cool kid table. And I think for Christians, that has the appearance of providing us with a seat at the cool kid table of culture. We can believe the things that will gain us cultural street credibility and maintain a Christian label. Number two, the second motivation behind progressive Christianity is the opportunity to have sex with someone you aren't married to. And that might sound ridiculous, but I don't think it is. It'll sound like a drastic oversimplification, but I really believe that for most people who move into progressive, I don't like to call it Christianity because honestly it's not Christianity, progressive spirituality are those two motivations. And the reason I say that is because it's usually one of those two things or both of them that manifest themselves first as someone walks away from biblical Christianity. Often it will begin with social justice concerns that are mirrored by our culture. And this is often easily masked because many of those concerns are good and valid and motivated by compassion. And so they're good things. But what you will often notice is the concern will be limited to meeting people's physical, social, mental, or emotional needs, but it'll be totally devoid of addressing their deepest spiritual needs, which means the mission in the social justice realm often is devoid of Jesus entirely. So what this typically indicates with someone who's moving in that direction where they have great compassion and great concern for social justice needs, apart from Jesus being a part of that or king over that, is that the person who's motivated in that way lacks confidence that Jesus actually is who he says he is. In other words, the person who's embracing this really and truly doesn't believe that Jesus, as he said, is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. See, if we truly believe that, it would actually motivate us to feed people physical food and spiritual food. If we don't truly believe that, then what we'll do is we'll just focus on the physical to the exclusion of the spiritual. The second thing you'll see happen with people who move into the progressive realm is a questioning of God's good intentions around sex and marriage. And this may be motivated by a desire to appear tolerant. That's a great value in our culture, even though the most tolerant are typically the most intolerant. But this desire to appear tolerant to other people, in other words, getting that seat at the cool kids table, or it might just simply be motivated by someone's sinful sexual desires. After all, God didn't really say that marriage and sex are exclusively for one man and one woman in the context of marriage. And if that's the case, if that's what you believe, then all bets are off. So this is why, with so many famous authors, musicians, etc., the first visible step away from their faith begins with a mere conversation, quote unquote, around these things. And then the very next thing you know, they're getting a divorce. It happens over and over and over again. And it's worth reminding the listeners today that the first sin that ever happened or occurred began with a conversation between Eve and Satan, the enemy, who really just questioned God's intentions. Did God really say that you couldn't touch that tree in the middle of the garden? And she has a conversation that leads to a disaster. So eventually, what you will see, and often it doesn't seem to take long, is an all-out rejection of faith in Jesus. And this has been called deconstruction, and the internet is full of deconstruction stories. So I see those two motivations showing up over and over in almost every deconstruction story. And in my estimation, it typically begins with a rejection of biblical authority that quickly leads to a rejection of biblical sexual expression. So let me read Romans 1 to you and see if this isn't familiar. It says this: "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and the things that have been made. So they're without excuse. For although they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and exchanged their foolish heart became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies from among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who's forever blessed. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, maliciousness. They're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them." What you might notice in that lengthy discourse there is that it begins with a simple exchange, the truth of God being exchanged for a lie, worship for the Creator being exchanged for worship of the created. And then everything quickly devolves, quickly descends into absolute and utter chaos. And the first step into that chaos, so almost immediately after this exchange is made and we worship the created instead of the creator, we exchange the truth of God for a lie. The very first step is usually a sexual one when we step into sin. And the question would become why? And the answer, I think, is this. What better way to tarnish the image of God than to trash male and female distinctiveness? What better way to attack man's intimacy with God than by perverting man's intimacy with each other? What better way to attempt to diminish God's glory than by demeaning the way that a man and a woman can uniquely reflect God's glory through marriage, union, and sex? You see, progressive Christianity isn't Christianity at all unless you can claim to be a Christian in any meaningful way without believing that the Bible's God's authoritative word and that Jesus is the only way of being saved. So, if you try to press in on someone who claims to be a progressive Christian on those 2 points, they will want to inevitably invite you into the conversation. They'll tell you it's very nuanced, and they will want to say that it's very complex. Now, why do I bring this up? 2 reasons. Number 1, I love you. I love you, and I love those that you love. And those are my 2 primary concerns, you and those you love. You need to be on guard against giving into those motives by reading the Bible, treasuring the Bible, and not being ashamed of the Bible, and then living under biblical authority. Also, if you have children, friends, family that are compromising their views of Jesus and their view of the Bible, I want you to be equipped to help call them home, which means that you have to be immersed in Scripture, but you also have to understand our culture. I have a stack of 4 books here I'd like to recommend to you. I know that you get tired of me talking about other books, but some of you don't. Some of you are nerds like me. So the first one is by Alisa Childers. It's called Another Gospel. She's got a great YouTube channel, by the way. If you don't like reading, check her out on YouTube. But this is kind of her story. A lifelong Christian seeks truth in response to progressive Christianity. It's very well written, very well done, very simple, very easy to read. Also, check out her YouTube channel. She's phenomenal. She's fantastic. This is a brand new one called The Gathering Storm by Albert Muller, Secularism, Culture, and the Church. I just kind of wrapped it up this morning. It's really timely, really helpful. If you're a C.S. Lewis lover like me, you might like this reference. This is called That Hideous Strength, How the West Was Lost. This is by a guy named Melvin. It gives you a little bit more of a historical background for how we got to where we are. And then this one's maybe I've referred to on the podcast before. I can't remember. It's called A Grand Illusion by David Young, How Progressive Christianity Undermines Biblical Faith. Very, very, very helpful, very well done, and also a very easy read. So check those out if you want to, and we will catch you next time on Locker Room.